Welcome back, everybody. Great to have you with us on the program today. This Week in America, leadership, whether supervisory or upper management, requires a special skill set. And what are those skills? Well, our guest on today's This Week in America, Dr. Stein, says leadership is changing. What's needed are more leaders with emotional intelligence. Dr. Stein is a clinical psychologist, CEO of Multi-Health Systems Incorporated, a leading publisher of scientifically validated assessments for more than 30 years. MHS is a 3-time Profit 100 winner for fastest growing companies in Canada, and since 2013, one of Canada's best managed companies. Dr. Stein is a recent winner of EY Entrepreneur of the Year Award for Health Sciences in Ontario. He's the author and co-author of several books on emotional intelligence, including the international bestseller, The EQ Edge, Emotional Intelligence and Your Success, and his new book, The EQ Leader, Instilling Passion, Creating Shared Goals, and Building Meaningful Organizations Through Emotional Intelligence. Dr. Stein has consulted for military, governmental agencies, corporations, professional sports teams, as well as numerous reality TV shows, an international leading expert on psychological assessment and emotional intelligence. Dr. Stein joining us on This Week in America. Dr. Stein, welcome to the program. It's great to have you with us.
Well, it's great to be with you, Rick.
What a fascinating book. And you've got a quote in there that really captures your attention. This is from Jack Welch. He says, "No doubt emotional intelligence is more rare than book smarts, but my experience says that it is actually more important in the making of a leader. You just can't ignore it." And that comes from Jack Welch. So often when you're talking about emotional intelligence, people aren't quite exactly sure what you're talking about. Let's start with that. What is emotional intelligence?
Well, let's boil it down to 3 basic things. The first is the ability to be aware of your emotions and the emotions of people around you. The second is the ability to manage your own emotions as well as manage those of people around you. And the third is the ability to use emotions to help you get things done, like make decisions, deal with stress, and get yourself motivated.
You know, people talk about IQ as maybe being the predicator of being a great leader. It really isn't the case anymore, is it?
Well, IQ is important. You have to have a certain amount of cognitive intelligence to get things done and do things right. But the real differentiator today and in the future is all about emotional intelligence.
I mentioned the assessment, psychological assessments that you've been doing for years. And you say in the beginning of the book that this really came about, over about a 20-year period before you really found clarity in the role of emotional intelligence.
Yeah, the assessment started back in 1985, before anyone ever heard of emotional intelligence. Started with a psychologist named Reuven Bar-On, and he developed it as a dissertation, PhD dissertation. And we got involved in the early 1990s, where we really brought it up to speed and made it useful for the organizational workplace community, and started doing a lot of research on how important this concept is.
And there are misconceptions out there. You talk in the book basically that someone says, but if you're nice in certain business situations, you'll get eaten for lunch. And you point out being nice really isn't part of emotional intelligence, is it?
No, that's a big misconception
that
some people have. No, it's not about being nice. It's about using the right emotion at the right time for the right thing.
With us on the program is Dr. Stein. The book we're talking about is The EQ Leader, Instilling Passion, Creating Shared Goals, and Building Meaningful Organizations Through Emotional Intelligence. The book is available all across the country, all the bookstores, online, of course, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Information at Dr. Steven Stein's website, drstevenstein.com, and you can link on directly by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. You break this down into basic 4 pillars that we all can understand. The first pillar you talk about is authenticity. Talk about exactly what that is and why it's so crucial.
Well, authenticity is really about, walking the talk, being real. And you're not going to be able to inspire people today, especially millennials, if you're not real. If they think you're faking it or you're just putting on airs, you're just not going to be making it as a leader. You have to be real.
And you're talking about, you mentioned that for today's leaders, humility is really a strength. That's really an important part of leadership today.
Absolutely. And, we're not the first ones to discover this. Jim Collins talked about it in his book, From Good to Great. And there's a lot of research data now that leaders with humility are much better at getting things done than those who are bombastic and yell at people.
And being a good leader, you talk about one of the pillars as being coaching. Talk about the role of that and how important that is, and maybe people don't understand when they're actually coaching or not coaching.
Okay, well, in the old days, it was, leaders would just say, go do this and give you an
Yes.
instruction and wait till you came back. And that's not working anymore. Today, we have to make sure that people have, everything they need to get the job done, whether it's the tools or materials or the knowledge, training. And as a leader, you have to be much better at being able to interact with people, making sure they have what they need, coaching them along, help them, and mentoring them to get to what they need to get the job done.
You talk about the role of mentoring rather than policing. Talk about how important that is, that you've got that openness, that coaching as you're dealing with employees.
Yeah, we have to hope we have the right people in place. I mean, that you don't need policing if you have the right person selected for the right job. And then it's a matter of really putting them in the right direction, making sure that they're doing the kind of work that they're excited about, and you're giving them the tasks that are challenging, and you give them the tools they need to get that job done.
One of the pillars is insight. Talk about the role of insight and communication as well.
Well, what we mean by insight is really the ability to communicate with purpose, with meaning, and with a vision. People today don't want to just work for the dollar. They want to work for something more. They want some meaning in what they do. And what we found is when we studied leaders and organizations, that those that were doing the best, performing the best, were in organizations where they could express what it is we're here for, that there's some larger meaning to what we're doing. We're helping people in the community. We're helping people in the world. We're really making a difference with the work that we do.
The book is called The EQ Leader, Instilling Passion, Creating Shared Goals, and Building Meaningful Organizations Through Emotional Intelligence. Dr. Stephen Stein is the author, our guest on This Week in America. Book available all across the country. You can link on to thisweekinamerica.us and get all the information from Dr. Stein's website. One of the pillars as well, he talks about encouraging innovation and risk-taking. Let's first of all talk about innovation. How important is that, and is that something that some leaders really don't pay that much attention to?
Absolutely, and that's why we've seen such huge disruptions just in the last, 10 or so years with, companies being totally blown out of the water because leaders didn't look to the future. They didn't see what was coming down the road. They just wanted to stick with tried and true ways. And in order to survive as a leader now, you have to be on the lookout for what might disrupt you in the future. It's really important to come up with new ideas, to try new things, to take risks.
How important is it to give the people on your team, the people under you, the employees, some autonomy where they actually can maybe respond quickly to what they're seeing as changes in the marketplace?
We find that so important, and that's something we do right here in our own organization. There's a certain amount of autonomy that everyone has to try something new, to discover things, whether it's a new process and how to get things done, or coming up with a new product or a new way to serve customers. Some of the best ideas we've had have come from letting our employees come up with ideas because they deal with the customer day to day. I don't see them as much as they do.
When they come up with a new idea and it fails, how do you handle that? I'm assuming you need to be able to understand that when you take risk, you don't bat 1,000.
Absolutely, Rick. That is such an important point. As leaders, we often have a difficult time dealing with failure, and we have to learn how to accept it. What's important is that we get a learning point out of that failure. It's always, we see it as a success as long as you've learned something. You've got to come back to us and tell us what's the learning of that experience that you've gained.
Talk about the difference between transformative leadership styles and transactional styles. What's the main difference there, and are we seeing a shift in the marketplace now?
We're seeing a huge shift. So a transactional leader is kind of a tit for tat. You come to work, I'll give you a paycheck.
Right.
You do this, I'll do that for you. Very, transactional. A transformational leader talks to you in a way that what you're going to do is really important. We're going to make a difference in this world. And it's a whole different way of dealing with your people. It's empowering them. It's giving them the tools they need to get the job done, trusting them. And that's the way our workforces are moving today.
You talk in the book about yesterday's leaders, today's leaders, and tomorrow's leaders, and it's fascinating. Let's go back to leadership in the category of yesterday's leaders. And you talk about Henry Ford, who was successful at the time, probably couldn't translate that to being successful in modern times. Talk about yesterday's leaders, what they did and what they couldn't do now.
Well, for yesterday's leader, what was really important was the term I use is steadfast. To really stick to your guns, go down with the ship. That's what a leader meant back then. And, he didn't want to change the color of his cars, the Ford Model Ts back then, refused to make any kind of changes because it looked bad. Yesterday's leaders were governed by their ego, how they would look to others if they made a change or looked like they were weak or making a mistake. Today's leaders, we looked at people like Bill Gates or we had looked at Steve Jobs, they're much more adaptable, and that's the signature strength I'd use for them. When they saw changes coming, they looked forward. They didn't look backward. They looked ahead and where the world was going and made changes in that direction. We've been studying for tomorrow's leaders, and the signature characteristic we've come up with basically is social responsibility. We're going to see tomorrow's leaders because we're tired of leaders who don't give a damn, who just, do things and get into trouble over them. We want leaders of the future who really care about communities, care about the world, and operate from good vibration.
Bill Gates is a perfect example of that. And you talk about what in the 1990s, you're one of a couple thousand people as he's giving a presentation. Where Bill Gates is today is not where Bill Gates was when he started this process. Talk about the transformation and the open mind that he had and being able to adapt to get to where he is today and one of the most successful people in the world.
Well, that's a really interesting transformation right there because when I saw him speak back in the 80s, that was when the internet first came out. And at that point, Microsoft, he was saying on behalf of Microsoft that they weren't going to go with the internet. They didn't see a future in it. It was still 10 or 20 years away from being useful. And of course, he was shortly found to be wrong when Netscape came out and just went wild on the stock market. So he was able to adapt and to change and to see the future. And we've seen him adapt now where his focus is on social responsibility, is on helping and changing the world. So he's been really transformational in his term as a leader.
Really crucial is the mindset of people that are now entering the workplace. This is going to be, obviously, the future in determining what's going to happen, how we're going to succeed. Talk about millennials and what really resonates with them.
Well, millennials want meaning. They want to go to somewhere, and they also want to learn. They want to know it's not just what are you going to pay me, it's what am I going to get out of this job? What's going to be the benefit for me? What skills am I going to learn? What abilities am I going to get by doing this job? It's more of a transaction, and they will need transformational leadership to get to where they want to go. But on the other hand, we find that they tend to be a bit more dependent than the baby boomers and the other groups who are going into the workplace.
I mentioned the assessments that you've done. You literally have studied, hundreds of thousands of cases. This, the book that we're talking about, the EQ Leader, Instilling Passion, Creating Shared Goals, and Building Meaningful Organizations Through Emotional Intelligence by our guest on the program, Dr. Stein. The background of this is a whole lot of research that went into this.
Sure. We developed the EQI 2.0, the Emotional Quotient Inventory, which was actually the very first test ever measuring emotional intelligence. And in our database, we've got probably around 2 million people worldwide that we've tested, including thousands and thousands of leaders, both successful leaders and not so successful leaders. So we've been studying performance of people of all types and ages and cultures for over 25 years now.
Deloitte did a recent survey and found that global survey that found that leadership was the most urgent concern when considering gaps in workforce readiness. We crank out supposed leaders on an ongoing basis. What are we missing? What are the qualities? What makes a good leader?
See, what we find are these qualities, like these 4 pillars that we've been talking about, that
Right.
ability to be authentic, that ability to coach others, to be able to communicate with purpose and meaning, and to be innovative. Those are the 4 qualities made up of the 15 components of emotional intelligence that we've been talking about. And we're putting people into leadership positions because they're good at a skill, they're a good salesperson, they're a good engineer, they're a good accountant. But that's not what leadership is. Leadership's more about managing people and moving an organization forward. So we need a whole different set of skills that go beyond the skills that we had working on the front line.
As I'm reading the book, I'm thinking this has more applications than just business, does not, this concept. I mean, this is something that in our personal life that we can use.
Absolutely. Everyone's a leader in their lives somewhere, whether we try and get our kids to do their homework or we talk to our friends and trying to make a decision where to go for dinner. Someone takes the lead. Someone's able to influence everyone else. And we take on leadership positions day to day in all kinds of activities that we do. So the skills that we talk about in the EQ Leader are skills that you can apply in your home life, in your social life. They're very valuable skills.
How surprised were you as you started this process to realize the role of emotion in being a good leader? Because as we've talked about, up until recently, it was sort of all based on skills and IQ, and now we're entering emotion into this. And a lot of people would think emotion is probably something that you really need to be somewhat skeptical of. What was it like for you as you were going through this process?
Well, I got a lot of people who were skeptical. I had some really difficult radio interviews, by the way, where they were attacking me for bringing up emotion into the workplace. I would travel around the world. I would go to London, England, and have senior HR people say, this is ridiculous. In England, we don't have emotions at work. We leave them at home. So, I had a lot of people sort of debating me along this topic. But I think over time and a lot of the research that we've done and other people have done, I think we're vindicated to a large degree, where more and more we're seeing the importance of how to use emotions well in terms of being a good leader.
You've got great examples and great research in the book. The book is called The EQ Leader: Instilling Passion, Creating Shared Goals, and Building Meaningful Organizations Through Emotional Intelligence. The author is Dr. Stein. He's our guest on today's This Week in America. The book's available all across the country. You can find it online, of course, at Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Information at Dr. Stein's website, which is drstevenstein.com. And you can link onto our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and go directly to Dr. Stein's website. Interesting book. I really enjoyed having a chance to read it and talk about it on the program. Dr. Stein, thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thanks a lot for having me, Rick.
Once again, the name of the book is The EQ Leader, available all across the country, and information, of course, available at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. And we're back after these messages.